Hello and welcome everybody to the first edition of our new series, Planted Unearthed. Over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to explore how design, sustainability, food and nature can combine to create cleaner, greener, better looking urban spaces. We'll look in depth at how we can reconnect with nature by speaking to some of the most innovative and respected thinkers in this field. Today, for Planted Unearthed's first edition, we speak to one of the world's leading experts in something called biophilic design, namely Oliver Heath. Oliver, welcome to Planted Unearthed.
Thank you very much, Sam. Good to be here. Well, I'm here. I'm here in my office in Brighton, which is just a short cycle from my home because let's face it, somebody has to water the plants.
Oliver, how are you finding lockdown? It's obviously an extraordinary time for everyone, but personally, how are you finding things?
Yeah, well, putting aside the anxieties about the virus, financial anxieties, and everything that goes with that, what is interesting is the slowing down of the pace of one's life. I spent a lot of my life traveling around England and Europe, teaching people about health and well-being in buildings and biophilic design. And now I'm forced to slow down. I'm still conducting webinars and seminars, but definitely got a little bit more time on my hands to take things a little bit more slowly, to look at the changes going on around me. And, you know, it is springtime here in the UK. And, you know, the natural world is sort of bursting forth, and it is incredible just to watch it and have that time to look at the things that are most important to us around our lives and notice those subtle changes and get some benefit from it. So I'm taking some solace in the slower pace of life and the little benefits that life is giving me.
And so many people are finding ways of reconnecting with nature by whatever means that may be, whether they're lucky enough to have access to outdoor space or the countryside around them perhaps, or other ways of accessing nature as well. But I mean, how are you and your family able to get in touch with the natural world and sort of the natural rhythms that are around us?
Well, I'm lucky enough to live in Brighton. So we're flanked on one side by the sea and the downs on the other. So we're still allowed to get out and do some exercise. So I spend a little bit of time every day walking my dog, maybe we're going up to the downs, or I walk along the seafront. So we are getting to experience a little bit of nature. But what is interesting is, as everybody's been locked down and forced to stay inside, the desire to get outside. And I'm just seeing so many more people get out there and running and jogging, whether it's on the beach, in the forest, in the woods, up on the downs. You know, there is clearly a greater desire to be in and around nature and to gain some of that benefit. And for me, that can only be a good thing.
We've talked at Planted about wanting to reconnect cities with nature, wanting to reconnect urban spaces with nature. I mean, do you see this changing relationship being something that is more permanent, perhaps, after the lockdown comes to an end and the fears over the pandemic drift away?
Yes, absolutely. Before the pandemic, we were estimated to be spending 90% of our lives indoors. Now we're probably spending closer to 98% of our time if we're not allowed out for 1 hour. So clearly the spaces that we're surrounding ourselves with, which are mostly our homes, are going to have an enormous impact on our mental, physical and emotional states. And I think we're realizing that more than ever as the diversity of spaces that we're occupying is reduced down to 1 or perhaps 2 if you're lucky enough to live close enough to your office. So we're recognizing that our homes are important to our physical and mental well-being, and that our connection to nature does add an enormous benefit as a means to reduce stress and anxiety, to helping us getting back to being at our best, to remain calm and happy. And I think that is only going to go on. I think once we come out of lockdown, we're going to want to bring some of that nature with us into our cities, into our neighborhoods, into our streets, and the buildings that are most important in our lives, whether that is our homes or our offices, but even some of those more commercial spaces like hospitality and healthcare, of course.
Now, you're a pioneer of biophilic design in many ways, at the forefront of that movement. I mean, you've obviously touched on it a little bit in what you've just been saying, but can you elaborate a little bit? When did you first become interested in biophilic design, and what is it?
Yeah, so essentially, I've been fascinated in sustainability over the last 20 years. Not just how we manage to bring that into buildings, but also how we encourage and stimulate its uptake. For much of that time, it's really been about those more straightforward metrics, things like the reduction in use of basic resources like gas, water and electricity, the use of sustainable materials, but also how we keep materials in a loop of usefulness in what we now call the circular economy. So that's essentially a more carbon-centered approach towards sustainability. But what we're now seeing is a shift, a development of that conversation to one that's become more human-centered. And when we talk about human-centered design, it really looks at health and well-being in buildings. And my particular focus has sort of veered towards biophilic design, which in many ways is the kind of visual aesthetic of what a healthy building might actually look like. So biophilic design essentially is how we improve that human connection to nature. And of course, for many people, they go, well, that's just about bringing plants in. And that is, of course, one feature of it. There are actually kind of three core concepts to biophilic design. Firstly, it is about how we bring and strengthen our connection to sensory forms of nature. It may be about plants and trees, but it's also, of course, about natural light and fresh air, those subtle changes that we see throughout the year as we move between seasons. It might be about how we bring water into space as well. Secondly, it might be about indirect connections to nature. So this is how we mimic or evoke a feeling of nature, using natural materials, colors, textures, and patterns. And for me as a designer, this is really, really important because so many of the spaces that we are given to redesign and reconfigure don't have much opportunity to connect with the real forms of nature. So that mimicking or creating a feeling of nature is a really fundamental tool. And the last one is to remember, essentially, as human beings, we are part of nature. We're not above it in some sort of pyramid. We're very much within that circle of life, as the kind of cliche goes. But, you know, we're dependent on life itself. So remembering that buildings are there, they need to excite us and stimulate us. We need to create buildings that are aspirational, but also to create places that are calming, relaxing, and restorative to help us being at our best.
I know you touched on some fascinating points there, Oliver, but one thing that's really interesting to me, particularly because it's a question that's been asked of me a lot during this time, is this sense that if you don't have physical access to the natural world, you don't have a beautiful park on your doorstep, you don't have the ocean by your balcony overlooking the ocean, but you can actually access nature in different ways. And in some ways, technology, it seems counterintuitive, but in some ways, technology can actually help us with this process.
Yes, well, exactly. There is so much incredible technology that is mimicking nature in all sorts of ways. Whether it's lights that mimic natural light, what we call circadian lighting, that changes color temperature, whether it's our ability to mimic it with digitalization through printed images or screens. Maybe it's through acoustics and apps that can mask sound. Maybe it's in the ability to contain natural features like water and introduce water features into our homes. We're seeing a whole myriad of different planted wall situations, active air, living walls that can actually filter the toxins out of air by drawing air through the leaves, through the roots of plants, and it's those roots that actually filter out things like formaldehydes and volatile organic compounds, and then pump out fresh air back into the space. There are so many exciting things. I'm working with a company at the moment called Interface, who take a biomimetic approach to the design of their carpet tiles. I mean, it's kind of quite simple, but basically they're inspired by the colors and patterns and textures that you find in nature. The randomness of that, and then translate that into a carpet tile. And that kind of allows us to bring that sense of nature, that mimicked quality in color, texture, pattern, and randomness into buildings. And, you know, in a little square like that. So there are so many things that we can do as designers. It's so much more than just bringing plants and greenery into a space.
And also so much more by what you're saying than people's homes. We're talking about people's office spaces. There are commercial, real tangible commercial benefits to improving people's surroundings through the principles of biophilic design.
Absolutely. I get so frustrated with traditional forms of design, which are often just seen as sort of opportunities to express identity, but, you know, be that power or wealth or intelligence or sense of style. You know, these are very sort of extrinsic ways of using design. Biophilic design and health and well-being are much more intrinsic approaches that really look at how a space makes you feel and helps to support you in delivering on that task. And for me, one of the most fascinating things about biophilic design is it's what we call an evidence-based approach to design. So it uses psychological studies carried out over the last 20 to 30 years that demonstrate the business case for introducing elements of nature, showing that it's not just as, you know, a nice to have, but actually an essential component in how we create happier and healthier and more productive places. So there's lots and lots of research studies that demonstrate that actually when we bring that enhanced connection to nature into buildings, it can improve the functionality and the outcome, but reduce costs. So in schools, it can help to improve productivity, attendance, and even test results. One study showed that students who studied in classrooms with real timber walls had a reduced heart rate of 8,600 beats per day. In the world of healthcare, there are studies that show that actually when patients recuperate with views looking out, they can reduce their recuperation time by 8.5%. They feel less pain. They need to take less medicine. Hospitality, see increased rates of room bookings and increased sort of dwell times in hotel lobbies with elements of nature. And in the workplace, this is probably the area where there's so much interest and value and a strong business case for demonstrating why we should be improving that connection to nature, where it's been shown to improve productivity by anywhere between 6 and 15%, to reduce absenteeism by 15%, you know, reducing negative costs and improving outcomes. But on top of that, it also demonstrates the importance of how nature can bring us together to connect, to put us in a more positive, open and optimistic state of mind. And of course, as designers and architects, we should be looking to mitigate some of those negative costs and improve building outcomes. And for me, that is what's so fascinating about the evidence that underpins biophilic design.
So real tangible commercial and societal benefits that you're talking about there, which are going to be, I guess, much even more relevant as we move forward and out of this horrible situation we find ourselves in at the moment. I mean, I guess for the time being, Oliver, obviously the workplace and the office as we once knew it clearly is for another time. But if you were to give one piece of advice to people who are stuck at home at the moment, who are trying to understand how they could connect in a way that would help them through all the means that you've just discussed, I mean, could you give some advice to people who are at home at the moment who want to explore this area more?
Yeah, well, obviously we're all spending a lot more time on virtual communication systems like this. And what I do see is that lots of people have orientated their workplace kind of in the wrong way. So, you know, firstly, remembering that natural light is one of those kind of key drivers to our well-being. Natural light and increased connection to it helps us to create a balanced circadian rhythm, which is our body's connections to periods of light and dark across a 24-hour period. It affects our mood, our behavior, and our body's release of melatonin and serotonin, which are our body's sleep-wake hormones. So when we're locked down inside, we've got to remember that natural light is fundamental to helping us being alert and awake and focused in the daytime, but also to get a good night's sleep. So finding some way of getting natural light, whether that's sitting by a window, managing to get out onto a balcony, into a garden, spending a little bit of time in a park safely, is really important to our well-being, because it's fundamental to our sleep, and our sleep affects all sorts of things like our interpersonal relationships, our ability to focus and concentrate, and also longer-term health issues like a risk of diabetes, obesity, and depression. So natural light is important. Position your desk towards a window. You may get some view out, allows you to relax your eyes. Maybe you'll see a tree or some plants and get some of the sort of gentle movement that can help you to recuperate. take some time off, just spend some time in nature and appreciate some of those subtle changes that our normal fast-paced lives prevent us from seeing. Maybe start a little allotment, grow some herbs or plants on your windowsill, and just enjoy that as well. I mean, it's something that I'm doing and get an enormous amount of satisfaction from.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's certainly something we've been doing at home here. If you look over to my left at the moment, our windowsill is essentially just tomato plants, cucumber plants, and a few courgette plants, and it's just a really lovely feeling, isn't it, to nurture something and actually grow it and care for it and bring it to the point where it produces fruit and it can feed the family. It sort of feels like a very, very kind of deep-seated natural process.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what we talk about within biophilic design is really quite primeval. It is essentially an evolutionary design ethos that looks at how and where we've evolved in close connection to healthy forms of nature for our basic human survival. And in a way, much of what we talk about has some sort of genetic inheritance within us all. It makes it quite a universal approach that says, we need to create spaces that are clearly healthy and flourishing. And some indicator of that is if a plant can survive and thrive, then perhaps we too can flourish in that space. So having plants and greenery around us is an important indicator to it. But also I think there is something quite wonderful within these times when so much seems out of our control to be able to take back control, to support and nurture a little element of nature. We're not necessarily in control of it by any means, but it is wonderful to experience the magic of nature, to go from, a simple little, brown object that's a seed into a shoot, and then to see leaves coming out of it and see those essentially, little natural photovoltaic panels gain energy from the sun, and to sprout and root and develop fruit that we can eat is incredibly satisfying. And it really does resonate with some deeper part of ourselves and our own well-being.
Definitely. I mean, in terms of Planted itself, Oliver, you've been associated with Planted now for several months and a friend of the business for sure. But in terms of our connection with nature, we talk about the reconnection with nature, reconnecting urban spaces with nature. As we move forward, is that something that you feel is just inevitably going to happen more?
I think we're all recognizing just how important our connection to nature is in our everyday lives. The UK is about 90% urbanized. We're seeing levels of urbanization rise around the world. By 2050, they're going to rise to about 60%. So we're seeing a movement towards our city centres. We're seeing stress level rise in all sorts of ways and the impact that has on business. We're seeing the increased use of technology, meaning that we don't sit and relax and recuperate as we once did. When we turn away from our work, we go to our phones for social media, the news, the weather. And all of this basically means that we have increased stress, less opportunity to connect with nature, and many more distractions from the people around us and the natural world. We're becoming increasingly disconnected, and that is damaging, not just for our own physical and mental well-being, but also our connections to others, and of course, our productivity and our own well-being. So I think what we're going to start to see is an increased realization that nature and our well-being isn't just a personal responsibility, but something that is good for people and it's good for productivity. We're going to start to see a shift in the way that we bring that sense of nature back into our cities, increase that opportunity to have healthy well-being corridors that take roots right from our city centres and out into nature. We're going to see changes in transportation systems as we switch away from cars towards electric vehicles, whether that's scooters or bikes, encouraging people to spend a little bit more time. We're going to see those elements of nature being brought into our neighbourhoods. Maybe we're going to be seeing micro parks, water features, increased uses of trees to reduce heat build-up of the urban heat island effect. And we're going to see that sense of nature being brought onto building facades and then right into our buildings as well, recognizing that this nature and the nurturing and looking after of it is fundamental to our mental, physical well-being, but also in the many tasks that we need to operate and the impact that the buildings have around us on our well-being. So it's going to be quite a holistic approach. Yeah.
Oliver, it's been absolutely fascinating listening to you explore this subject. Thank you so much for your time. Really optimistic note to finish on, which is good news for all of us. We're all looking for some good news at the moment, and I think you've touched on some really optimistic points to look to the future. So thank you for your time, the first interview on Planted on Earth, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future. Thanks, Oliver.
Thank you, Sam. I would just like to sort of finish on one point that, it's worth remembering at this time, as a real virus goes viral, that it's making us all remember that we're part of nature. We're not masters of it. We're very much a guest within it, and we need to remember that. And we need to respect it and work out ways of remembering that essentially that our health and well-being is intrinsically linked to the health and well-being of nature around us. And I'm delighted to be kind of part of Planted and what it's doing to recognize sustainable design, urban greening and well-being, and how fundamental that is to the future of humanity.
We're lucky to have you as part of the team as well, Oliver. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon. Take care.
Lovely. Thank you, Sam.
All the best.